Hello there. Over the years, Hammer Studios have been making many films. They have a big reputation for making horror movies. Now you might be thinking you've never seen one of these films, but the chances are you probably have. They've not just made horror movies, they've made all kinds of films. They've made dramas, they've made comedies, they've made historical epics, they've made dinosaur movies, and my favourite film genre of all, which is psychological thrillers. Films such as The Nanny, Scream of Fear and Paranoiac are among the most classic of those psychological thrillers. But their biggest reputation is their scary films, their horror movies. If you've seen Woman in Black, you'll know exactly what I mean and how frightening their films can be. However, their old films, their horror ones that is, they've dated heavily, sadly. They've not aged, well they have aged well, but they're just not as scary as they were in their time. You could put them on, some of them, kids could watch them now and they probably wouldn't be frightened. In fact, it's a good idea to let them watch them as a treat on Halloween night, for instance. Hammer started off in the 1930s, believe it or not. It was a man who had a stage name. His stage name was Will Hammer. He named himself after his hometown of Hammersmith. He just decided to get a film studio together, got some colleagues, they all got together, they all worked on films before. They started producing films from a small studio place in London. Gradually, they just got more and more successful. But before that, obviously World War II broke out and they closed down. But then they reopened again. It was his son, the Hammerman himself, his son decided to reopen the studios in the 1940s. And then they carried on making films. They made crime thrillers, gangster films. But then they decided that because science fiction was doing so well with B-movies that is, they decided to make the first science fiction film that wasn't a B-movie, but they made it scary and horrific. It was called The Quatermass Experiment. It was for adults only. It was based on a TV series, only this was different. Children couldn't see it. And that's when they realised the old horror genre was back. People were frightened and people wanted to see this film, go and see it again. Straight away, Hammer decided to do a sequel, so they did Quatermass 2. But it was at that time that they decided to do a remake of the old black and white horror movie Frankenstein and just see how it goes on. Only this time it will be in colour. It starred Christopher Lee as the creature and Peter Cushing as Dr. Frankenstein himself. It shocked people everywhere. It was in colour, and because of that it meant that the blood would be red. So in order for that to happen, they knew they were going to shock people. They even thought the film could end up being banned. When the film was released, it broke box office records. And since then, Hammer has made sequel after sequel to that film, along with other horror films. When Dracula came out, that broke even bigger box office records. And again, there's been sequel after sequel to that. Since then, there's been other horror films, The Phantom of the Opera, The Mummy, Curse of the Werewolf, and many vampire movies. They go on countlessly. But then again, the Dracula films are vampire films as well, so you can argue about how many vampire films are made. My favourite films of all kind are the psychological thrillers, but they've also made a lot of these old dinosaur films, long before Jurassic Park was out, and such TV shows such as Primeval, long before we had CGI special effects. They had to actually make the dinosaurs by animating them. 1 million years BC, for example, that absolutely smashed box office records. Again, that spawned a sequel, and many other movies which involved cave girls, monsters, historic moments, things like that, prehistoric stories. They've also done a series of other films. The comedy films, for example, they're known for the On the Buses movies, and they're also known for these other spin-off of TV sitcom movies, TV sitcoms that were well known in the 60s and 70s, such as Love Thy Neighbour and Man About the House and Nearest and Dearest. Hammer made all these movies of those films, and George and Mildred, How You Been Served, and so on. So they've not just done scary horrors, they've done a few comedies as well. It amazes me though, they're a British company and they make British films. They are now back. So far they have only been making horror movies. So anyway, the next one, which is a remake of The Abominable Snowman, about the Yeti of the Himalaya, I'm certainly looking forward to that. It should be out in 2016 or maybe the year after, it just depends on how long it takes. It's been filmed in the Himalayas and they'll use the latest CGI effects to create the Yeti creature to make it come alive. Anyway, that's my presentation on Hammer Films. I hope you enjoyed it. Goodbye.